So I think a lot of repurposing works. Having a good publishing native where it's like this is clearly done for YouTube. That's going to do a lot better. And then obviously, when we think about tools that we use in the YouTube world, TubeBuddy, right, or vidIQ from a keyword perspective. When you publish your video in the first hour, if the headline's not taking off, if the thumbnail's not taking off, if it's not like a top 3 video, and you can see this in YouTube Studio, if that's not working well, then you change it, right? And so if you have a content team, if you have a budget, like some of the biggest companies out there, like a HubSpot, they hire people specifically just to update content.
Now, obviously you do podcasts. I personally put my podcasts on YouTube as well. How is YouTube fitting into your overall strategy? Because obviously you've got a good following in YouTube. How does that fit into what you're doing?
So I would say YouTube, what works really well is when if this is being filmed and we put it on YouTube, this will do a lot better than us publishing like a Zoom interview, right? Like people have gotten really lazy with that with the pandemic, and myself included. The engagement retention sucks on that, right? And obviously with YouTube, you're a YouTuber as well. What matters the most? Click-through rates, right? Your headline, your thumbnails matter a lot, but also the content itself, it's got to be engaging. This is why Joe Rogan does really well with his podcast. Patrick Bet-David, they have a studio for it. So I think if you have a studio build out, it ends up doing a lot better. It's worth it to invest that 5, 10, 15, maybe even 20 grand for a studio. But and if you can get that machine to compound, there's actually a podcast in Miami where they just talk about dating all the time. Some of these videos get 800,000, 1 million views or so, and it's like a 5-minute clip just from that podcast. So I think a lot of repurposing works. Having a good publishing native where it's like this is clearly done for YouTube. That's going to do a lot better. And then obviously, when we think about tools that we use in the YouTube world, TubeBuddy, right, or vidIQ from a keyword perspective. But I think what most people don't do is actually using this is where I usually don't use VAs, but this is where you can use a VA, where you have someone that's looking at your competitors, what video is getting the most comments, what's getting the most click-through rates, which videos are trending, and then you can figure out what videos you want to attack, because you've already seen those videos are proven in YouTube. And this works for TikTok as well. And I know had a bunch of people just talk about TikTok.
So you're using vidIQ and everything else. Is that obviously you're still optimizing and everything else, but what are the other advanced things you're doing in YouTube? Obviously ranking well in YouTube, SEOing on YouTube is a big thing. What can you give the audience here today that would help them rank well other than vidIQ?
So I've actually we've hired a couple of great YouTubers, right? So they have millions of subscribers, and the thing they always say to us is, when you publish your video in the first hour, if the headline's not taking off, if the thumbnail's not taking off, if it's not like a top 3 video, and you can see this in YouTube Studio, if that's not working well, then you change it, right? And we had one of these videos recently on NFTs. It was tanking in the first hour or so, and so usually I won't jump in, right? But I decided to jump in on this one, and I changed the title, and then it just started shooting up, right? And it became one of our top videos in the last 2-3 months or so. So I think people don't appreciate that much, but when you think about Mr. Beast, he's got 100 million subscribers. It's literally thumbnails and it's click-through rate, right? And obviously you want to make the best video possible. That's the biggest barometer. So what works really well for us right now, and that's really underrated, is updating content, right? And there's actually something that Google released recently. They just patented this on kind of information freshness, right? And what they're looking for is, because a lot of the search engine results, they look the same right now. A lot of because everyone's copying each other. Everyone's doing this, skyscraper thing. They're all copying each other, right? So they're looking for anything new, a new insight that you might have, maybe some data that you can share. If you have that on the page, you're going to do a better job of ranking well. And most people don't think about updating their content, right? And so if you have a content team, if you have a budget, some of the biggest companies out there, like a HubSpot, they hire people specifically just to update content. And I have a survival blog that gets a couple million visits a month. We have a couple of writers that are just dedicated to just saying, okay, these are our top 20 posts that we've had in the last 12 months or so. Let's update it. Let's add a paragraph. Let's add 2 paragraphs or so. Let's add some insights in here. Maybe it's an interview like this, or maybe there's some data that you can pull, some proprietary data, and that's underrated. What's also underrated is we have software that we give away that shows when your content is decaying, when you're losing traffic on specific content. You can DM me on Twitter for that or something. But when you give away free software, this is in SaaS, this is known as product-led growth, and that's a very long-term way of thinking, right? But when you look at what HubSpot did when they started giving away their CRM for free, if you look at what my podcast co-host Neil has done with Uber Suggest, that's for free, right? He just bought Answer to Public, like free. And so we believe that the future of SaaS is giving products away for free because that's the modern day infographic, right? Like 10 years ago, it's like, oh, you got to make an infographic and you're going to get a lot of links. No. Now the bar's lifted. Now you better build some software and add a lot of utility, and that's how you can get the links coming in. And like that also builds word of mouth as well.